Okay, looks like we're ready to go. It's 5:31. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I should also say good morning to Carol in Atlanta, and good evening or good night to Josephine in Hong Kong, and good afternoon to Amanda, who's on our same time zone. Today's panel discussion is going to be around a topic which is very important and also personally very dear to me, and it's around diversity, equity, and inclusion in real estate, and what can we do as professionals to challenge the status quo. I'm very excited about this panel because the speakers we have on it, especially, they represent diversity in the real estate segment. They're leaders in their industry that represents different aspects of real estate. Amanda's in the executive advisory role. Josephine works in the real estate finance aspects, and Carol is on the retail and CRE side. And on top of that, they also represent a lot of geographical diversity given where they're located. So I'll hand it over. Let's start from the east to the west. So for some intros, Josephine.
Yeah, sure. Hi, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. So I think what you were looking for, Nicholas, was a little bit of an intro from all of us in terms of how we got to where we got to today and a little bit of a background. I didn't actually start in finance. I started in the arts. I started by studying music at Oxford University. And I also did a diploma in Italian language and culture. But I always wanted to work in finance. And I took my first job with Apax Partners, which is a private equity firm. Studied in my spare time for the Chartered Financial Analyst designation. And then private equity took me into mergers and acquisitions, where I moved to HSBC's leveraged finance team. Spent many years there, and that was really my technical training ground. I started off in London, responsible for leveraged corporate and infrastructure finance. I was then posted to Australia to build out the Sydney team. In 2014, I moved up to our Asian hub here in Hong Kong, where I am now and where I'm speaking from today. In 2016, I was asked to be regional head of credit and lending for HSBC's global banking platform in Asia, which was responsible for $100 billion in assets under management. After holding that role for 3 years, I actually chose to return to product, mainly because I actually missed the excitement of being at the edge of innovation and thought leadership. So I moved to my current position, which is responsible for real estate lending across Asia for HSBC, lending against large commercial property portfolios backed by global sponsors and corporate clients. So that's a little bit of a short overview, but I actually wanted to take this opportunity to say that as I was thinking about this and thinking what I was going to say to you today, I thought back through my career and I realized that at each critical stage, trust was placed into me by a senior influential man, and I was given the wings to fly, but I also knew their support was in the background. So for me today is all about thinking around unconscious bias, fear, jealousy, what wasn't there in that menteeship. Because for me, senior mentorship, support, and the open-mindedness to see the strength in the face of diversity has been really key through my career.
Thanks, Josephine. Over to you, Amanda.
Great, thanks, Nicholas. Lovely to hear your introduction there, Josephine. And actually, we share a passion for music, which is lovely. So I'm kind of arts and science mix originally, but fell into quantity surveying as my first degree. Really having sort of broken away from and worked in my father's business, which was electronic engineering. So I was doing a lot of work around computer systems development, sort of in my teenage years, but really landed on a career that really from the start, I just absolutely loved. I did a day release degree, very much like an apprenticeship model today, working 4 days a week and also studying at university 1 day a week. And interesting at the same time was actually doing a teaching diploma in music. So that's kind of where that came in. But the music had to give. It didn't pay the bills and I wasn't good enough. But I still have a real passion for music now. I then went on to do a master's degree in programme management, which I did at the University of Reading. And I think actually that way of studying in many ways fast-tracked my career. I became a partner at the age of 29 and led on business transformation for what was effectively a large capital programme management organisation. And then really through that did some massive projects, a lot in government, particularly being a mission critical programme engagement director for Number 10. So I had the pleasure of walking in and out of Number 10 and being accountable to the SPADs there. But then also across the private sector. And I really loved that blend of working public and private. But through that got noticed and, found myself on various platforms speaking, but also then had a career leap into PwC as a partner there. Absolutely loved it. Real variety, and I was with PwC for nearly 10 years before then kind of jumping ship, as it were, and going to EY where I was head of infrastructure. So that was the first time really I had my career that aligned very much with the real assets environment, so infrastructure and real estate. And that was really on the back of, at that time, had become Senior Vice President and on the route to become the Global President for the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. And that was certainly a pinnacle of my career. I took up the presidency in 2016, had a fantastic opportunity to really shape the profession and to drive my areas, which were around cities, infrastructure and the war for talent. And that really came out from an RICS Futures report that we'd done, which identified that there was a major concern from employers about how to attract the best and brightest people into the built environment. And also actually from a number of the employees where they said their number one consideration was how do you remain relevant in a changing world? And that's for me really sparked the two things coming together, that real need around the diversity of talent, so the ED&I aspects within our sector, and just realizing how woeful it was, which I then decided I could do something about as a leader, and wanted to use that as an opportunity and a platform to really talk about diversity and inclusion. I've since written 2 books, both of which I co-authored. One is in German, and it was the first book published, and the second one in English and published globally, which is Managing Diversity and Inclusion in Real Estate. It's written as a CEO guide, and all of the author royalties go to Land Aid, which is a youth homelessness charity. And huge thanks to my co-author, Judith Gabler. I'm now at CBRE, where I'm an executive director. I'm head of strategic advisory. I chair our strategy board. I'm the executive sponsor for our Ability Network. So looking forward to having a really great conversation.
Thank you, Amanda. Carol, over to you.
Sure. What a wonderful panel. So my name is Carol Joyner. I live in Atlanta, as Nicholas said earlier. I work for SRS Real Estate Partners, which is a commercial real estate brokerage firm based in the US. My journey started actually 28 years ago in business school. For me, like this industry was something that I was not familiar with, right? So I grew up around real estate. My father was in real estate, but on the residential side. And actually for him, for us, it was kind of the side gig, I would say. But the world of the commercial real estate, site selection, retail, like it was a world that I personally was not familiar with. I was in business school. Taco Bell, which was a PepsiCo company at the time, came to the university to recruit. And honestly, someone talked me into going to the interview. They went through our resume book and said, you know what, we want to talk to various folks. I had worked actually in pharmaceutical sales with Merck previously, but they, said, hey, we want to talk to some different people. Thank goodness they did that, because it was the beginning of just, for me, a wonderful journey that I would not have chosen on my own because I was not aware of it, frankly. went to work for Taco Bell in the real estate management program. They, at the time, hired 3 classes of 30 MBAs 3 years in a row because they wanted to do business differently. They decided that, you know what, we wanted to train and develop our own teams, and we wanted to show them our way of site selection and strategy. So again, right place at the right time. We all know how hard it can be to train and to hire diverse talent, frankly, because sometimes there's just not the time to train. So went through that journey with Taco Bell, was there for over 5 years, and really benefited from mentorship, benefited from that guy and it was a guy that took the time to say, hey, Carol, let me show you about the construction side of the business, like someone that really, that I really connected with, that allowed me to be very comfortable there, and he taught me as well. From there, I went to the Gap and spent 13 years there, starting as a leasing representative, and then left the Gap as a vice president, overseeing 1/3 of the country and 1,600 stores. But again, that foundation that I got at Taco Bell and that mentorship that I got there was the basis for my success, I truly feel, at the Gap. From the Gap, I went to the landlord side of the business. So my retail career has been, I call it multidimensional. But then I spent several years with different, dominant US landlords. One was Eden's, and then I spent several years with General Growth prior to the Brookfield acquisition. From there, and I will say as well, I mean, when I think about those transitions, it was all about relationships, right? It was about someone that I had worked with years ago who was at Eden's, who said, hey, Carol, we want to look at things differently, and we know you're a retailer, but we're thinking about mixing it up some, and we'd love to get your insight wearing a different type of hat in our world. I made that transition. I went to General Growth. Again, a relationship, someone that I worked with at the Gap. I think we all know that our world revolves around relationships. And I think that, is an integral part of this conversation we're having today, because sometimes, sometimes there's a relationship and sometimes there's not, right? But it doesn't mean that we still should not look at our workforce and say, you know what, how do we create the best workforce for where we are today? And then how do you bring people on board that may have different relationships than what you have, right? So I look at my role, as a leader within companies, to add that different perspective in a conversation, to have those different relationships. I know about different programs that maybe other people aren't aware of. And I really think it's my responsibility to interject that into a lot of that dialogue. So fast forward to current, I'm now working in tenant rep, commercial real estate brokerage. I work for SRS, and it's been a really wonderful journey for me. It's 28 years in the industry.
Wow. Thank you, all three of you. As I mentioned to everyone, this is why I was very thrilled to be able to moderate this panel. If you look at the depth of experience of the speakers, and if you think of the leadership they're driving is going to make an impact on future generations and on what diversity, equity, and inclusion looks like. As an architect and as someone who's been working both on the corporate side and in the sustainable development world, I've had to deal with these issues in many different ways, diversity, equity, and inclusion in a corporate office, or maybe building houses after a hurricane in a remote area. And what I'd like to quote before we get into the conversation is a great sentence I received from a leader of our organization. Her name is Shelley Wright, which is about the importance of DE and I. The importance is about the E, right? Because I think diversity and inclusion is something which we're organically getting to, but equity is the part that's very important. And equity and equality are, of course, different, where equality means everyone gets the same thing. Equity means everyone has access to what they need. And so on the basis of that, one of the first questions I'd like to pose to the panel is, nowadays, there's so much happening. You mentioned so many different aspects and intricacies of the real estate cycle. how do we challenge the status quo, and what do you see are the underlying problems or the first challenges and the hurdles we need to get across to be able to, as leaders, create environments that foster equity, and as real estate professionals, build places which support that sense of equity for everyone. Josephine, do you want to kick that off? We'll keep doing the east. We'll keep doing the east to west thing. So we'll go from.
All right, I'll go first again. I mean, in many respects, right? It's the question I've got is real estate any different from any other industry here, right? Because what we're solving for is diversity. And I think everybody is finally becoming aware of the fact that there is diversity in the world, but we're not necessarily harnessing it. And that can come from anything to, your basics in real estate around making sure that buildings are constructed with equal numbers of male and female loos. I mean, that's about as basic as you can get, right? All the way through to, connecting businesses with funding that comes from female-led, entrepreneurs or founders. There's a whole great big spectrum. And I think really where the rubber hits the road for me is this concept of risk-adjusted returns, right? We've been learning about risk-adjusted returns since we were all grads, right? We understand the economics, but the point of risk-adjusted returns is that they improve with diversity. And, when I look at, I read an interesting book called The Female Brain by Luann Brizendine. Luann Brizendine is a neuroscientist, and she was studying at Yale, and she asked her professor at the time, why is it that none of these tests on the brain, none of these experiments have been done on female brains? And the professor's response was, because the menstrual cycle messes up the results. And this was back in the 70s, and she took it upon herself to study the female brain. And it turns out that the female brain and the male brain are fundamentally different, right? The average intelligence of men and women is the same, but the way that the brain works, the circuits, the way that the circuits operate, they actually operate in entirely different ways for the same task. The different parts of the brain, the amygdala is larger in the men, the prefrontal cortex is larger in the female brain. And when we think about diversity, and this is not just, men and women, it happens to be something that I know about, but, this goes across cultural diversity as well, that we have all of these different diverse approaches. And when you bring that all together and you look at, okay, what is risk-adjusted returns? How do we improve those? How do we avoid groupthink? That comes from bringing everybody into the picture and making sure that you have enough different viewpoints, different approaches, different ways of working that you can actually challenge the status quo. So I think it's something that we need to address right across all parts of the globe in all different industries, not just in real estate.
I'll pick up from there because I think that's a really great segue. And I think for me, there's sort of something around that equity that you talked about, Nicholas. And I think there's kind of like different elements, because actually real estate is quite different in terms of the dynamics, in terms of some of the key protected characteristics. I'll just quote from the RICS in terms of the 135,000 members that exist around the globe. It's interesting when you look at the number of females that are qualified as surveyors, and the number is actually 15%, 15%. I find that quite staggering when you kind of look at the workforce in general, and actually particularly we're here as a built environment to effectively to create the communities, and therefore if we're creating those communities we have to be representative of them. If you look at broader protected characteristics around disability, ethnicity, or you're looking at LGBTQ+, for example, again, the percentage of qualified members globally it falls to circa 1%. Now that's not equity evident, and it's not diversity evident. So that for me says we have to do something differently in this sector in particular to really change the dial. And I think there's kind of like there's four areas. One is around attraction. The second is around how do we then develop our people. And it's interesting, Josephine, Carol both talked about sort of like that male champion of change, mentor, sponsorship that was there. I think also that you need females climb the ladder, but bring someone with you. Either way, mentorship and role modeling, really important. We then need to retain our people. And I think the fourth area that quite often gets forgotten is how do we bring back people? So how can we re-attract people that might have left for career breaks, family breaks, or caring responsibilities? But I think there's so much on the equity question that really looks at the attraction point. So how can we get messages out to educate the educators, which is particularly people in schools and colleges, the mums, pops, and teachers? So how can we tell them about this great industry? And how can we also then look at particularly developing the apprenticeship route, whereby you have that kind of corporate sponsorship, which allows you to earn while you learn? And also then, how can we really support the graduate cohort so that they're coming out and they're really employment ready? So I think for me, attraction around equity is incredibly important. The develop and the retention is down to the employer. There's a really great sketch that we have in the book. All of the illustrations were done by Farley Katz of the New Yorker. And I love it because it's somebody holding a sandwich and you have the two pieces of bread and one guy has all of the fantastic fillings between the two layers of bread. But the other person literally just has the two sort of like pieces of bread and no filling. And basically that's to emphasize that it all depends on the middle, and it all goes wrong in the middle. So actually where we have to really invest about developing and retaining people is actually how do we develop those middle managers and really make sure that they're there and they're being those role models, they're being the competent leaders, they're encouraging that next generation, and they're really supporting that top talent. At that point, I'll
Thank you. Wow. Such good points. Thank you. And we're seeing some questions come through, but we'll address those as we go in the panel. Carol?
Yeah. Well, and you know, you spoke about leadership, right? And I think that it all really starts with that company leadership. And I think what comes with that leadership is also educating your existing workforce. So you know, we've done SRS, we've done a lot of DE&I work, and you know, part of really helping people understand the difference in that equity and that equality is having those internal conversations. Those conversations can be smaller conversations. I think it's important for people to share their personal experiences. It can be larger conversations. We've created a resource bank if people just want to get, you know, on their own, read and help educate themselves on, you know, DE&I and some of the resources that are out there. You know, you talked about the pool that's out there. You know, I kind of have two thoughts on that. One is, you know, as a company, we've been very active with trying to, we've got a lot of interns coming in this year. We're a sponsor with ICSC to help. They've created a launch academy, kind of supporting what you're talking about, Amanda, like how do you get more people into the pool? But I'll tell you, the other thing that I've noticed is that, you know, one of the things that we always talk about in the industry is, well, you know, we need somebody that can hit the ground running. We don't have time to train. Like that is a common conversation that we have about when we start having conversations about diverse workforce. And I guess my take on that is that, you know, I think we all see people every day that we train, you know. If we look at ourselves, how did we get into the industry, right? At some point, someone had to take the time and teach. So I caution us as you know, leaders in this industry that are trying to make a change, that we don't always default mentally to, you know, there's no experience. We all know that in our industry that sometimes it's the son of someone that we've done a deal with, or someone we've worked with, or the daughter, or whatever the case may be, and we give them grace. All right, we give them grace because we have a relationship and we want to foster their success in our organization. What I ask is that when you're in that leadership group, that you may need to give someone grace that may not have the technical skills, but maybe the the character, the leadership. What else can they add to the discussion? Maybe they have a different area of specialization. Maybe there's a different geography that they focus on that can add value to the organization and the conversation. So there's more ways to evaluate just that experience. I think it can be broader than than the checklist a lot of times we use in our industry.
Carol, can I just pick up on your point there about that that engagement? So it's almost like if somebody gets a pass into a company, what I've heard is a really good idea is actually where for every person that kind of gets that free pass, you actually look for somebody from maybe a different socioeconomic background that you can then match in. So you have a target for everyone that kind of is coming in on one route. You're actually looking for somebody to match it from a talent from a different one. And I think that's a really great idea. So you're kind of using it as a lever to kind of give somebody else a chance too.
Yes,
Right.
I like that. I like that. But I think what's also key with that is appreciating the unique and special talents that that person brings, because sometimes that's where the inclusion part comes in, right? And it's making sure that person comes in with the, and I'm going to use mentorship. I think the word can be overused, but let's say, but with someone there to look out for that person. It could be making sure that they are in the loop with the unspoken cultural things that are happening within the company. Right? We all know that there's certain pitfalls that you only learn about from relationships and people, and it can be as easy as, hey, making sure that when everyone is going out to lunch, the new person is also invited to go to lunch, right? We know there's a social part of this as well as a technical, it's not only about, let me bring this person in on this great deal that I'm working on, but it's also about, hey, if we're all going out for cocktails later, let me be sure I've also pulled Carol and say, hey, you want to go with us? Because it's that inclusion is critical, or there won't be retention.
And we just got a couple of questions. Oh, you go, Josephine.
Yeah, I was going to say, Carol, I think your word grace, I think that's a really powerful word, because one of the challenges that we get is, okay, so I've tried to look for my diversity candidate, but actually, the total pool of candidates in this particular field doesn't have enough, right? It's the classic challenge to the question there. And, I think, obviously the inequality starts from quite a young age. It's not just necessarily the CVs coming in through the door at the graduate recruitment stage. It's also through the education system as well. And so it's always going to be there. And I think that word grace is really critical, because what we're effectively saying is, okay, but we actually need to challenge the status quo. We need to force some of these hires in. They may not necessarily be the obvious candidate. It may have been the only candidate that we could find in this particular bucket. But until we actually start building out that platform and having leadership being diverse, only then do those underneath leadership actually see the diversity from the top. Yes, there are going to be some dud hires. There are dud hires everywhere. There are, there are already dud hires in the majority, and that is going to happen. And actually, that grace word, I think, Carol, is really, really relevant, because that's what we need to do. Sorry.
No, great points. And like I'm sitting here thinking, I mean, I've been fortunate to receive great mentorship in my career, but boy, the way you're talking about mentorship and talent nurturing and people development is very inspiring. And it can definitely make a change. As a, just a passing comment, where I think we have leaders like yourselves who are really driving this agenda, trickling down this mission from a internal part of the business of employees down to your supply chain and your partners and your consultants and the whole business ecosystem around you is definitely something that's going to be very challenging to unpack. But, seeing people like you and the way you're approaching it, I'd say there's definitely some hope ahead. But we'll get to a question which came from the audience. What is the prime motivator to take the time to teach rather than hiring someone who is competent and ready to go? And I think you've spoken about this within your answers, but is there a business case that you put together? Is it just a heart decision? Is it a technical decision? Does one of you want to take this?
Well, I'll just make one comment. There's a whole bunch of stats, and I don't have them in front of me, that says that who you hire is generally based upon a narrow set of information, based upon, first impressions and a limited data set. Your ability, everybody's ability to hire the right candidate based upon what they actually can achieve over the next 3 to 5 years is really limited by that first interaction. So I think, one of the comments I would make to that is if you actually go and check out those stats, you'll find that there's limited data actually backing up making the hires that we currently do make, and therefore there's a very good case for actually investing in something that we already have.
I have to say, I quite like looking for somebody that because it's hugely rewarding as a manager if you take somebody and you can kind of see them on their career journey and help them to realize their potential. That's just personally, I just get a real buzz from that. I can always remember I was setting up an office. It was a temporary office. We were doing a piece of work for a particular client that just needed some stuff fixing and rapidly. And I literally brought in somebody. She was actually a vicar's wife, and she'd spent years supporting her husband. And she was kind of like in her mid-50s. She was very sort of like typical of a vicar's wife. I would describe slightly kind of like floral in her dress, and she didn't have the right office language, but there was just something about her that really stood out, and I could just see that she was going to be different and would kind of bring a different influence to what was quite a young cohort that we were working with. And what was really fascinating with her is she stayed the course. She was absolutely brilliant. We trained her up. We gave her the tools. We gave her the language. And so much so that actually at the end of the day, the client hired her directly, which was just a real buzz in terms of sort of seeing her kind of like move through. Now, it took me, I can remember in the interview, I'd set aside an hour, and it probably took 2 hours to actually properly interview her, because we were kind of just, I knew she knew it. She'd been running sort of so much for the church for so long. But actually, if you said to her, can you set a template up? Can you kind of, send out, email shots to 1,000 people? Can you do all that kind of stuff? She was like, you had to kind of talk her through it. But that investment of time just kind of gets real payback.
Mm-hmm. And I love that investment, right? And I do think that it is an investment. There was a report done by McKinsey, and I'm going to look at it right, that says that companies that were in the top quartile for ethnic and racial diversity in management were 35% more likely to have financial returns above their industry means. So it may be, a situation where maybe this hire cannot immediately generate those returns, but if you look at it as an investment, then the returns could be there from a longer term perspective. And I think we all get it. It may not be a situation where you can do that for, all the positions you have available. But what I would also challenge and say is that, there are other opportunities that may require a bit more time, but you may be able to find that person that does not need that extra training as well, right? But it just may not be someone that is part of your immediate circle. It may be, taking a few extra steps with different organizations, different diversity in commercial real estate organizations. In the US, we have Project REAP, which is a wonderful organization. So it may be reaching out and understanding that there are other resources there than the resources that you typically use, but those resources may have that the candidate that fits what you're looking for perfectly. And Amanda, the person that you mentioned, I had a company say to me once, which I thought it was beautifully phrased, that they look for people that are cultural ads as well, right? So it could be, you talked about, the floral, like she added something to to the dynamic and to the spirit of that conversation. And I can remember even back in my Gap days, you know, we are, you know, committees intense, you know, a lot of deals are happening. And, you know, that cultural ad that joined the group, I'll say, and it was part African-American female, part female, to that male-dominated group, lifted the entire group. Maybe I'm a little bit biased, I don't know. But, you know, there was definitely a cultural spirit energy ad that came to that group that I think that the whole group benefited from. So I think there's a lot of different components and aspects to consider when making those hires.
Yeah. Great series of answers. And I loved how the three of you kind of gave a different drive and also way of answering it. But what brought it in common, I think, across was your answers are, I'm seeing they're really coming from your heart and from a good place of really driving change as genuine leaders. And so I'd like to give this a little bit of a different spin and go maybe more into more of a business aspect. We often talk about the business case of DE&I, right? And if you think of the real estate sector that we're in, I loved your initial quote, Josephine. It's not about equity in real estate. It's about equity just on this planet, whether you're in pharma, TMT, financial services, real estate, equity has to be the norm. But when you look at real estate in particular, we have lots of different pressures. We have policy, we have investors deploying capital in buildings, we have design, we have construction, we have tenants always amping up their demands and asking for more things. And so in your cases, of course, if you have leaders like you, you're bound to drive DE&I from a good place. But I'd love to hear a bit more about business scenarios and how do the real estate mechanisms work and what levers have you pulled in the past to drive this kind of agenda? Josephine, we're always going from east to west.
I'll start again. Okay, look, I mean, God, what's the business case? You know, this is one of my pet hate questions because to me, it's a commercial imperative, right? Because instead of thinking short term, we need to be thinking long term. Unless you future proof your business, unless you get diversity in there, long term, you're going to lose out, right? So it's a commercial imperative to get that equality in there. What are we doing at HSBC? Well, you know, we've got a number of initiatives internally, obviously, but externally, what we found is that there absolutely is a commercial imperative because our clients want to achieve diversity as well. We have gender-linked financing, which effectively is a product where we lend at a certain interest rate. And if the client hits preset targets, whether that's that they've got 50% women in leadership roles by a certain date, or they're putting funds into a female advancement program, or they're building diverse types of real estate and having equality in that real estate, that their margin will go down if they hit those particular targets. And if they don't hit the targets, then the margin goes up. It's exactly the same technology as we use for environmental facilities, and that's been around for 2 to 3 years. And I remember 3 years ago going out to see clients and saying, have you thought about environmental sustainability? And getting that blank look on the face from across the table, and then saying, well, maybe you should speak to your boss, because I'm fairly sure that it's at the board level. And it finally trickled down, and now obviously environmental sustainability is really high on most people's agendas, and there's a lot of product that's been developed around it. So we're really trying to deploy that technology into the gender space. And I'll tell you truthfully, that first conversation I had with a significant global sponsor client, where I suggested gender-linked financing, I was nervous because I didn't know how they were going to react. I thought maybe they were going to frown at me, think this is ridiculous, what are you talking about? And it was met with such enthusiasm, and it has been met by all of our clients with such enthusiasm, because it's a solution, it's a commercial solution to actually, you know, drive change in the wider environments around us, not just in our own institutions.
That's great insights, Josephine, and I really like the commercial imperative. That's a very robust and contemporary statement. So it starts from, let's say, the investment side, and you're making capital available on a, on a diverse basis. And then that capital some way makes it over to a landlord building maybe a mall or creating some kind of product and trying to attract tenants. And so, Carol, how does your world work? What are tenants asking? What kind of RFPs are you getting at the moment?
Yeah, so we are getting specific DE&I questions as part of the work we're doing. So we've got an RFP that is, Nike has asked. There's 5 questions on the RFP about your DE&I commitment. What's your any strategies? Do you have a supplier diversity program? Target has started a broker diversity initiative, and they sent out a 46-page questionnaire to find out, what are you doing as a company? So the first 46 questions were more fact-finding, and then they sent out 20 potential goals for your organization, and you had to choose 2 DE&I goals that you wanted to embrace as an organization. So, I mean, I think, our clients are asking as well. And what I found particularly interesting and enlightening, frankly, was that we embraced the survey questions, but we took it one step further, and then we pivoted and asked our suppliers and our vendors the same questions, right? So it kind of got tentacles to it. And we have a very strong and committed DE&I group, and we were, excited to be able to take what they provided us and use that to try to make change and impact to people around, to our business as well, frankly.
Mm-hmm. No, that's that it's I think maybe it was Amanda or Josephine, you said this in one of our earlier calls, but if the client sets the right agenda, they can drive the agenda. And Amanda, in your role, you're probably kind of coordinating lots of different stakeholders and just trying to make something happen in quite complex projects. What dynamics are you seeing on your side of business?
Yeah, sure. I think it probably was me that was sort of talking about that, because it's something I'm really passionate about. Because I think clients, we've got great examples with Josephine and Carol here, but actually, clients can really help set the agenda, because what gets measured gets done, in my view. And I think that's a really important aspect to sort of take into account. So actually, intelligent clienting can really help sort of influence the dynamic of something like D&I. And I think, we certainly do see a lot more of that kind of coming through in the procurement question. So actually having sort of that evidence-based response to it. But I think we all have a role on this agenda. And I think it's, obviously it's to walk the talk, it's to be authentic as leaders. I think, to be great role models. But interestingly, if I kind of like revert back to those sort of 4 pillars that I talked about earlier, I think, things like attraction, there's real practical examples that at CBRE, we look at, have a target around 50-50 in terms of gender diversity. We're starting to look at how we kind of increase our ethnic diversity, and actually how we kind of set some targets around that. On the area of development, we actively encourage and support people to be role models and mentors. So to run things like inclusive leadership programs, doing unconscious bias training for people, kind of looking at how you do interview training as well. So again, sort of setting key targets around what that looks like, having shadow boards so that people have got that opportunity to learn from senior people. I think also on the retention part, kind of really looking at what your staff want and what they want to see. So that all important aspect of networking, particularly, what networks can you set up within the organization that's going to give support to individuals. We actually have 8 networks. So our longest serving network is actually our women's network, which is now 15 years old. But equally, we have an ability network, which I'm the executive sponsor for. We have our Proud network, which looks at LGBTQ+ and providing support and allyship around that. Our Reach network, which looks at ethnicity. Our Women's network I talked about, armed forces, assistance for support staff, and then the junior board. And I think that just gives everybody a place in an organisation as well, where they can talk and they can share experiences, you know, whether it's sort of like a family network or a particular background. But I think the bit back to you, bringing back is another area that's quite often overlooked, and it's kind of back to this business case dynamic. And we ran a Back to You course, which was basically the opportunity to reach out, and it was a very informal trial about looking at people who were kind of like had been out of the work environment for a period of time, so over a year, but could be kind of, you know, 10 years out, and just kind of giving them that sheep dip opportunity to kind of come back in, understand what are the kind of common themes. We've put speakers on, particularly from our research teams. We helped sort of career CV guidance. We talked about like the tools, the technologies used, and then did rapid dating, you know, where they kind of got a chance to speak to lots of people in the business. And that was just an amazing way to kind of get interest. We got some really great people out of that came back into our business, but also giving people that kind of confidence. So I think, look, the business case dynamics that you talked about, Nicholas, I think, you know, they're fundamental, and Carol and Josephine have given really eloquent examples of that. I think, you know, people get that. It's kind of now, it's all about what do we do? What action can we take?
Word. And on that note, what I appreciate the most about the conversation so far is that you're also demonstrating and giving people in the audience real live examples of what can be done, because I've also found that very often DE&I can become very theoretical, and there can be a lot of statements and a lot of things that are said, but what happens when the rubber hits the road, right? To Carol's point, I think that's where, you know, demonstrating tangible results is very important. So we've got 12 minutes left. There's a question that there's two questions that came through. And we could probably keep talking for a while. So I'll take this question. Maybe we'll have a quick discussion around it. Then I'll circle back and answer the last one that came from Simone. So the question we got is, gender parity will not be attained for 99.5 years according to the World Economic Forum. Why would any female want to enter the real estate industry when the legal and accountancy professions have much better participation rates and career progression? And there's probably a few other industries that could make a similar statement. I mean, before I pass it over to Carol, Josephine, and Amanda, whoever made this question, it's anonymous. I'll answer it by just saying, look at the speakers on the panel. Aside from the fact that they're like, I didn't even introduce them as women. They're just fantastic real estate professionals who are leaders and making an impact in their industry. So if they haven't been able to inspire you as a woman to get into real estate, then maybe you should just be an accountant or get into something else. But Carol, Josephine, Amanda, would you like to answer that one?
Well, I'm happy to start. Seems that's my role in this. So I'm a glass half full person, right? So if you say to me that it's going to take so much longer for women to be equal in finance and accountancy, but in real estate versus finance and accountancy, I'd see opportunity there. I'd see, great, okay, there's more to be done in real estate. I mean, I don't know where those stats come from. I certainly wasn't aware of them. I think what I've really noticed, which is really positive over the last, it has been over the last few years, there has been a noticeable difference, certainly in the male-female mix. I don't know so much, I haven't seen as much in the ethnic diversity mix, but in the gender mix, there has certainly been a difference. And I've really noticed that in my day-to-day. It used to be a real slog trying to catch up with a client who was a male client for a one-on-one drink, because it's just harder to do that, right? Whereas if you've got other women in the industry, there's a natural connectivity and it makes it easier when there's balance through the industry. And, you know, we all have a different way of communicating and having, I've certainly noticed that has come through. So I don't think that necessarily, I don't think that real estate necessarily is this bad place to work in that isn't particularly diverse. I don't see it as worse than any other industry. But if that is the case, then we've got more work to do, and I think it's on us to speak louder, speak up, and really sort of challenge that unconscious bias and do everything we can to set it straight. But it's not my experience right now.
You know, we just had we have a women's group here, and we call it SOAR, and we just had a meeting last week. But this was, you know, part of the conversation was about how women, how a lot of women in the group, honestly, Josephine had the same perspective. Like, you know what, I realize that I'm different, but let me really lean in, for lack of a better term, on those differences and use my differentiation as an asset, right? The fact that I am someone different in the room, let me use that as an asset. It's about seeing the positive in it versus, you know, what some could call a negative, but we're going to focus on the positive. It is, I don't think that, you know, there are a lot of, it's funny, our industry, there are a lot of attorneys, right, that have jumped into real estate. There are a ton of, I don't know as much about accountants, but I know there's definitely a lot of attorneys. I think it's a wonderful industry, and whoever wrote this, I encourage you to try it and jump in, but it's one of the few industries where you can use so many different talents, right? You can use your negotiation skills, your legal skills, your financial skills. So, you know, let's not let just the guys enjoy it. Let's everybody jump in. Yes.
Right. And I'm going to build on that, Carol. Like when we talk about real estate, just looking at this panel again, we have someone in finance, someone in retail and corporate real estate, and someone doing an executive advisory role. So the thing is, often people have looked at real estate as, you know, oh, it's construction, it's swinging hammers, it's sites with no bathrooms, it's, you know, muddy boots and all that kind of stuff. But like, even in that sector, and let me tell you, there's a lot of coded bias because in developing countries where I've been working with materials like bamboo and doing more sustainable construction, women and men both participate in workshops and they build stuff together, right? So there's almost a lot of bias that we've built into things. And so the stats that are pulled up in certain things, which I'm not questioning, it's also our job to unpack those stats and challenge them. If everyone looks at those stats and says, oh, well, 99.5%, I'm just going to give up, then we're never going to change it. And if you're passionate about real estate, I don't think your color, your gender, or whatever you want to do should have an influence on it. And it's up to leaders of this industry to be able to provide environments for everyone to work in them. You know, people.
I agree with that. I love the Nike tick in terms of the quote of "just do it," because I'm also the glass half full person. I just think there's so much opportunity, and I think if there's one ask from us to all of the people that are listening to us, the one thing I would say is, you love your job, please go out there and just tell one person who's kind of under the age of 20 why you love your job. You know, whether it's the next door's kids, let them into your world and talk to them about what it is you do and what the potential is here. Because I think the problem is, it's like a diamond. There's so many facets to it. You know, kind of, you just mentioned, Nicholas, we all come from 3 very different backgrounds. We do very different jobs, but it's hugely rewarding. And what we want to do is just encourage more people to actually understand the world and have the confidence to come into this world, because it offers an amazing career. And it's so tangible because you're changing the world around you. You're shaping the world for tomorrow's generation. And I think that's hugely exciting.
And the big, Amanda, building on that, like another thing we also have to be cognizant of is we're in real estate. So we, at the end of the day, we're creating places. And we have an ability to create places that will inspire and transcend the values of equity, the people who go into those places. So the real estate sector of all sectors is the most important, because if you build a building in the spirit of diversity, that building should be able to transcend diversity. And so I think more than any profession, our profession has a responsibility that is maybe even greater. I mean, something as simple as having bathrooms on a construction site, which is such a stupid thing to say and so basic, makes an enormous difference, right? So And I know it sounds very obvious, and Josephine, you mentioned this before, but I really believe, especially going back on that question we got, real estate in particular is one of the industries where we can really make an impact in this sector. I'll take, there's one more question that just came through. It's a bit on a bit of a different tangent, so I might answer that one directly, but obviously, Carol, I know you're involved in philanthropy. Josephine, Amanda, you've all sort of been playing in this field, but this one's a bit of, I think, very important question and quite solemn from Simone or Simone, not sure how to pronounce that. In Ghana, we need more investors in the real estate industry as we have a deficit of 2 million homes. In terms of equity, I think that's a very relevant question. There's around 100 million people on the planet with no homes, and there's 1 billion people with inadequate homes. And that means it rains in them, there's no flooring. If it's windy, the roof falls off. And what's interesting is there's 1 billion people with inadequate homes, and there's around 200 million people who go to offices. But there's a lot more capital, intelligence, and effort around building nice offices than putting roofs on people's heads. And so when you look at our role in this industry, of course, the conversation so far has been around ethnicity, it's been around gender, and it's been about a lot of things which are very dear to us. But as professionals, we have to remember that, you know, the equity equation is global, and there's very important issues to be aware of. I work as an architect and studio lead for Unispace, and we build offices, beautiful workspaces, and we also dedicate a lot of our time to doing philanthropy. I built a school in Latin America, and we do low-income housing projects and build bamboo programs for areas that are affected by climate disasters. And I'll tell you something which surprised me. What gives the most value in terms of equity to places like Nicaragua, I've worked in Jamaica, planning something in Nigeria, very sad to see those stats on Ghana, isn't so much the funds, but it's the skills that we as real estate professionals can share with these people. The work we're doing currently in Latin America has enabled community members to write their own Gantt charts, write their own programs. Women who can do construction and can design, men who can build woven patterns and, you know, work to the schedule and produce budgets, and they're all working together. And I think the community empowerment aspects of equity are obviously very important. But I don't want to take this too off track. It's obviously something I'm super passionate about, and yeah, equity definitely involves many more things than the corporate aspects. But I believe if we change our corporate organizations first, we'll be able to make a step closer to changing the world.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I mean, that was a part of the philanthropic part is very important. You know, as part of our work, we did revisit, you know, where are we giving our money as an organization, and we made the decision to pivot and do something that was more, that also included, that would support our DE&I objectives, I would say, so that it's, you know, it's not building houses in Ghana, but it was what we could bite off, I would say, for this period of time. But I would just say globally in support, I do think there is a responsibility to also, you know, give back as well. So.
Your question on Ghana. Oh, sorry, you go. Just a quick one. If there's bamboo in Ghana, send me an email later, because it's a very interesting material for social housing. We'd love to connect with you on that.
It's really interesting, actually, Nicholas, and it kind of builds up on, there was a winner in 2019, RICS, it was their 150th anniversary year, and we ran a competition globally looking at cities of our future competition. And I'm really pleased to say that the winner was a 23-year-old gentleman from Manila. His name was Earl Patrick Falales, and basically he looked at slum housing and was using bamboo as the main way of actually developing a really quick and effective way of delivering that kind of fabric, and with it's a simple design but robust construction and robust materials, which obviously you know about. But I think what we've got to do is learn lessons. You know, one of the things we've all got to do is learn and share across the world, so that we can actually give everybody a home, because that's the most important thing. And I think actually, you know, the crisis the world has been going through with the pandemic, you know, you really feel for people that don't have a home more than ever. So many of us have been, you know, holed up in our homes during effectively a lockdown period at some point, but you know, you just feel for all of those people that don't. And we've got to do something to really help and share that learning.
To Josephine's point, when she started, she's been fortunate because she had many mentors, and she's been able to have a career as she's had in real estate. There's probably lots of people in Ghana or in other regions who mentors, they don't even have access to books. So how can they become architects? How can they ever dream of building their homes? Simone, thank you so much for the humbling question at the end. And you have our email addresses, and we'd you know, be very interested in taking that conversation further. And all the other questions, you know, if we had 4 or 5 hours to talk about it, we would have probably spent the whole evening on the panel. But I think it's 1 a.m. for Josephine now in Hong Kong. So thank you for staying up so late. We can wrap it up unless there's any last questions from the audience, or if there's any closing remarks, Carol, Josephine, Amanda, that you'd like to make.
I think just to say it's been a really great conversation, and I think isn't it great we're at least having the conversation now that this subject is no longer a taboo subject, and you can actually you can talk about ED&I openly and transparently. And I think, you know, we've got such potential within this sector in particular to really you know, make a difference. And again, I'd just say to people, please, 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 it's the storytelling that's so powerful in terms of just encouraging that next generation to come into this industry that we all clearly love.
Yeah, I would echo that. It's been a really fantastic hour. I've really enjoyed this panel. And like you, Amanda and Carol, you know, I feel actually really positive about where we're going. It is real, it is going in the right direction. And I'm just so happy to be on that journey.
And it's a journey, right? That's what I was going to say. And you ended it with that. It is a journey that that I'm excited to be on, but just know that it is hard, right? It's hard work, and that's okay. So when you're working and you hit a stumbling block, that's okay, right? We do that with deals every day, right? What do? You pivot, you come up with a new strategy. But you know, if you're here listening, thank you for listening. Hopefully there was some pearl or, you know, something that came out of the discussion, and we appreciate your support. You know, again, it was a pleasure to be here as well.
Great. So thank you, Carolyn Joyner. Thank you, Amanda Clack. Thank you, Josephine Jones, for joining the panel. Again, Josephine's in Hong Kong, Amanda's in London, Carol's in Atlanta. I'm in Milan. My name is Nicholas Gasparik, and I work for Unispace. It's really been a pleasure moderating this panel. You have our contact, so if you have any questions, please reach out. We'd definitely love to have this conversation again. And have a great evening and a great end of the conference to everyone.
Thank you, Nicholas.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.